Sarah pressed her face against the cool window of the late-night bus, watching the city lights blur past in streaks of gold and amber. The gentle rumble of the engine had become a familiar lullaby over the past few months. Every night, after her shift at the diner ended at 11, she would catch this same bus home to her small apartment where her 4-year-old daughter Emma waited with Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had become their saving grace. The bus was nearly empty at this hour. A few tired workers like herself scattered across the worn blue seats, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah clutched her purse tighter, feeling the meager tips from tonight's shift crinkle inside. It wouldn't be enough. It never seemed to be enough anymore. Her eyelids felt heavy as lead. The double shifts were catching up with her, and the stress of keeping up with rent, groceries, and Emma's daycare fees was wearing her down to the bone. She had been running on coffee and determination for weeks now, but even her stubborn willpower had limits. As the bus swayed gently around a corner, Sarah's head began to nod. She fought against the exhaustion, knowing she needed to stay alert for her stop. But the warmth of the bus after the cold October night air, combined with the rhythmic motion, was too soothing to resist. Without realizing it, her head tilted to the side and came to rest against something solid and warm. Through her drowsy haze, she registered a subtle cologne, clean and expensive, mixed with the scent of well-pressed fabric. Part of her mind wondered vaguely what she was leaning against, but sleep pulled her under before she could fully process it. The man beside her had been staring out his own window, lost in thought about quarterly reports and board meetings. David Mitchell wasn't accustomed to public transportation. His usual driver had called in sick, and his car was in the shop after a minor fender bender. The bus had seemed like an adventure, a glimpse into how the other half lived. When the young woman's head gently settled against his shoulder, his first instinct was to shift away. But something about her stopped him. She looked exhausted in a way that spoke of real struggle, not just a long day. Her work uniform was clean but worn, her hands bore the calluses of hard work, and even in sleep, there was a tension in her face that suggested worry was her constant companion. David remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her rest. He found himself studying her profile in the dim bus lighting. There was something peaceful about her sleeping face, a vulnerability that made him want to protect her from whatever burdens she carried. He had no idea why this stranger's well-being suddenly mattered to him, but it did. As the bus continued its route through the quiet streets, David made a decision that would have shocked his business associates. He pulled out his phone and quietly made a call to his assistant, speaking in whispers so as not to wake the woman beside him. "Margaret, I need you to do something for me," he said softly. "I need you to trace the route of the downtown bus line and find out about the businesses along the way. Specifically, I want to know about any diners or restaurants that might employ someone working late shifts." His assistant, accustomed to his unusual requests, simply took notes without question. David had built his reputation on reading people and situations, and right now, something told him this encounter was important. The bus driver, an older man named Frank who had been driving this route for 15 years, glanced in his rearview mirror and smiled. He had seen many things on his late-night runs, but there was something touching about the way the well-dressed man was carefully keeping still so the young woman could sleep. Stop after stop, passengers got on and off, but David remained motionless. His arm began to ache from staying in the same position, but he didn't move. He watched the city roll by, seeing it from this new perspective, and found himself thinking about things he hadn't considered in years. When had he last taken public transportation? When had he last sat this close to someone who worked multiple jobs just to survive? Sarah stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible in her sleep. David caught the word, Emma, and wondered if that was her daughter, sister, or friend. Whoever Emma was, she was clearly important to this woman who had inadvertently made his evening infinitely more interesting than any board meeting ever could. As they approached the East Side neighborhood, David recognized the area. It wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't particularly prosperous either. The buildings were older, the streetlights dimmer, and the businesses were the kind that served working-class families trying to make ends meet. Sarah began to wake as the bus slowed for her stop. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she was disoriented. Then she realized where she was, and more importantly, what she was leaning against. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she quickly sat up straight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, mortified. "I didn't mean to. I've been working double shifts and I guess I just. Please, don't apologize, David said gently. You looked like you needed the rest. Sarah gathered her things quickly, still embarrassed by her breach of public transportation etiquette. As she stood to leave, she finally got a good look at the man she had been sleeping against. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than she made in a month, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed genuine. Thank you for not waking me, she said softly. That was very kind of you. It was my pleasure, David replied, and he meant it. As Sarah made her way to the front of the bus, David made another quiet phone call. By the time she stepped off onto the sidewalk, wheels were already in motion that would change her life forever. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner for her usual breakfast shift, only to find her manager, Pete, waiting for her with an expression she couldn't read. Sarah, I need to talk to you, Pete said, gesturing toward his small office behind the kitchen. Sarah's heart sank. Was she being fired? Had she done something wrong? She followed Pete, her mind racing through possibilities. I got a call this morning, Pete began, from a company called Mitchell Holdings. They want to offer our diner a catering contract. Big money, Sarah. Really big money. Sarah blinked in confusion. That's wonderful, Pete. But why are you telling me? Pete smiled, an expression Sarah had rarely seen on his usually gruff face. Because they specifically requested that you be the point person for the account. They said they were impressed with your work ethic and wanted to offer you a position as their catering coordinator. The salary they're offering. He paused, shaking his head in amazement. It's more than I make, Sarah. A lot more. Sarah's legs felt weak. I don't understand. I've never heard of Mitchell Holdings. How do they even know who I am? I don't know, Pete admitted. But they're sending a representative this afternoon to discuss the details. Sarah, this could be the break you've been waiting for. That afternoon, Sarah stood nervously in the diner's small meeting room, smoothing her uniform for the 100th time. When the door opened, she nearly gasped. The man who entered was the same gentleman from the bus, but now she saw him in a completely different light. Hello, Sarah, David said with that same gentle smile. I'm David Mitchell. I believe we've met before. You, Sarah whispered, pieces falling into place. You're the CEO of Mitchell Holdings. David nodded. I am. And you're the hard-working single mother who showed me something I had forgotten about. What's that? That kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything, David said simply. You could have been embarrassed about falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder. Instead, you thanked me for not waking you. That simple grace, combined with what I could see of your character, told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person you are. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You did all this because I fell asleep on you. I did this because in a world where people often only look out for themselves, you still remembered to say thank you, David replied. That's the kind of person I want representing my company. The kind of person I want on my team. As David outlined the position, the benefits, and the opportunities for advancement, Sarah felt as if she were dreaming. But this wasn't a dream. This was her life, changing in ways she had never imagined possible. There's one condition, David said as they concluded their discussion. Sarah's heart skipped. What's that? David smiled. That you let me take you and Emma to dinner sometime. Not as your boss, but as someone who would very much like to get to know you both better. Sarah looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answered prayer, and for the first time in years, she felt hope blooming in her chest like a flower after a long winter. I'd like that very much, she said softly. Sometimes, Sarah thought later, the most important journeys begin with a simple act of trust. Like falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder and waking up to find that your life has been transformed by kindness.